After flourishing for countless centuries, the languages, cultures, and civilizations of the native peoples of North America were almost extinguished by the arriving Europeans. As the 19th century drew to a close and the Indian Wars in the United States were over, both the Canadian and United States governments, in an attempt to civilize and Christianize Native Indians, separated Indian children from their families and placed them in institutions called residential schools, where they were systematically stripped of their language, culture, and self-esteem. This practice continued well into the 1950s. These large residential institutions were run primarily by the Catholic and Protestant churches. What these schools did was to produce men and women who despised themselves and their roots. The near destruction of the once strong family system of kinship resulted in the beginning of a variety of social problems that have been perpetuated from generation to generation. Extensive research tells us that alcoholism, drug addiction, family violence, and sexual abuse found within the Native communities have their roots deep in the generations of Native children subjected to the residential school experience. These schools, with shocking consistency from coast to coast, were little more than brutal prisons. Their chief aim was to destroy any vestige of Indian culture, history, and pride. The schools were part of an official government policy set up to deal with the quote-unquote Indian problem. In the words of Duncan Campbell Scott, Canadian Minister of Indian Affairs from 1914 to 1932, quote, "Within 2 generations, there will be no Indian problem because there will be no Indians." As we shall see, the memory of these schools among Native people almost always produces strong emotions: pain, anger, loss, and bitterness. There is not one Native Indian in North America who has not been affected, either directly or indirectly, by the cultural genocide played out in the residential school experience.
The first time I went to a boarding school, my mom took me for an outing in the afternoon, and then I never went back home. And I kept thinking there's been a terrible mistake made and somebody's going to come back and collect me up. And when my mom and dad find out what you're doing, they're going to be really mad.
They seem to be mean, the strappings that we got. And there was one time I said something in our own language, and I had to walk around with a block in my mouth, like this, wide open. And that's the one thing I never forget.
And they had a funny kind of cereal there that had these little brown things in there or something or other. One of those mush types. I don't know what it was. But I remember throwing it up. Like I couldn't hold it in my stomach. I threw it up and they made me eat it again. And that was gross.
The violation